Look, we all have those stories we think we've buried. I'm talking 6 feet under, packed down with years of distance, burying ourselves in work and just pure silence. But here's the kicker. Life has this funny way of showing up on a random Tuesday morning to remind you that just because something is buried doesn't mean it's dead. I actually have a friend who spent 5 years, 5 whole years, trying to wipe a guy from her memory. She deleted the pictures, moved across the country, the whole 9 yards. Then, boom. She bumps into him at a Trader Joe's checkout line, and in an absolute instant she realized she hadn't forgotten a single thing. It was 5:40 a.m., and the sun was still hitting the snooze button. The sky was stuck in that weird twilight limbo, that muted purplish blue you really only catch if you're an early bird or an insomniac. But Natalia saw it, every single day. She'd be out there with her bare feet in the damp sand, letting the steady rhythm of the ocean act as a metronome for her constantly racing mind. By all accounts, 29-year-old Natalia had it made. She was the director of a coastal design firm, living in a stunning oceanfront condo she decorated herself. She built that life brick by brick, making all the right calls without anyone holding her hand. On paper, her life was flawless. She stood right at the water's edge, letting the freezing surf wash over her ankles. The coastal wind was whipping stray curls across her face, but she didn't even bother to brush them away. The early morning beach was her sanctuary. It was the one spot on earth where she could totally clock out, where she didn't have to be the boss, the professional, or the girl who had everything perfectly under control. Out here, she was just Natalia, the girl who craved silence over the noise of the city, perfectly content nursing a hot coffee while staring at the horizon. Or at least, that's the little lie she'd been selling herself. Then the car pulled up. It was black and stealthy, one of those absurdly expensive rides designed specifically to look like it's not trying too hard. It parked right at the entrance of the old abandoned property at the end of the boardwalk. The place locals still called the Vallant estate, even though it had been boarded up for over a decade. At first, Natalia didn't even bat an eye. Tourists, nosy real estate agents, they were always snooping around there. It was none of her business. Until the door clicked open, and she looked. And suddenly the world did that weird thing. It felt like the universe just slammed on the brakes. Everything went slow motion, like being underwater where the sound is muffled and gravity just feels incredibly heavy. Flashback 13 years, same beach, same dawn lighting, 2 barefoot teenagers sitting shoulder to shoulder in the sand, cracking up over some inside joke that neither of them would remember years later. But right then, it was the funniest thing on the planet. "Do you think the ocean gets mad when the tide goes out?" she'd asked him. "I don't think the ocean has to get mad at anything," he replied, flashing that signature half-smile he only used when he was genuinely happy. "The ocean always comes back." She looked at him, catching the water's reflection in his brown eyes. "Will you come back?" And spoiler alert, she wasn't talking about the water. He turned, grabbed her hand, and with a heavy seriousness that felt way too mature for a 17-year-old, he said, "I always come back to you. Snap back to reality." Bryan Vallant was 30 now. His hair was cropped short, his beard impeccably trimmed, giving off that effortless "I woke up like this" vibe that definitely took a lot of effort. But she'd recognize those brown eyes from a mile away. He was facing the old family estate when she realized she was holding her breath. And that's the exact second he turned around. Their eyes locked. Neither of them moved a muscle. The wind kept blowing, the waves kept crashing, and the sky kept brightening. The world didn't pause for even a split second to respect the heavy baggage of what was going down. Natalia. It was him. His voice was huskier than she remembered, but it had that exact same rhythm. He said her name like it was the only word that mattered. She just stood there staring. 3 seconds, 4, 5, then she turned on her heel and walked away. There's the kind of love you stumble into when you're way too young to understand what's actually happening. And then there's the kind of love that only makes sense years down the line, when you look in the rearview mirror and finally grasp the sheer magnitude of what slipped through your fingers. Let's be real for a second. First love is a beautifully messy collision. It's that one chapter in your life where every single emotion feels like life or death, and you usually don't realize until you're much older that it was just the prologue. But man, does it leave a mark. When it all went down, they were just 16 and 17. It crept up on them. It was a slow burn, kind of like the tide. First, it's washing over your ankles, then your knees. And before you even realize you've waded in, you're completely submerged. Bryan Vallant spent his childhood summers at that beach house. His dad, Renovating Vallant, had built the family's massive empire miles away from the coast. Real estate development, luxury hotels, the kind of generational wealth Natalia wouldn't fully comprehend until much later. But summers were for the beach. And the beach meant Natalia. She was Donna Carmen's daughter, the woman who kept the Vallant estate running when the family was back in the city. Natalia was all massive, untamed curls and perpetually scraped knees. She had an opinion on absolutely everything and zero filter when it came to sharing them. Bryan fell for the curls first, then the sheer force of her opinions, and eventually he fell for the way she laughed with her entire body, like the joy was just too massive to fit inside her chest. And Natalia, she fell for the way he actually listened. In a world full of people just waiting for their turn to speak, Bryan Vallant tuned in. He held eye contact. He'd bring up some random detail she casually mentioned weeks ago. He asked the kind of questions that proved he was genuinely paying attention. Think about it. For a girl who grew up as the housekeeper's daughter, practically invisible to the wealthy elites orbiting those massive beach houses, being truly seen like that was the most overwhelming feeling on earth. Their first kiss went down during a massive summer storm. They were 16, hanging out on the Vallants' wraparound porch, watching the rain absolutely batter the ocean with that chaotic, beautiful energy you only get in July. His parents were out at some fancy dinner. Her mum was inside the house. They were rambling about nothing in particular. Music, some movie he'd just seen, a stupid debate over whether octopuses were the smartest animals in the ocean. And right in the middle of a sentence, he just stopped. He looked at her. She felt the shift in the air before she even processed it. "Can I?" he asked. Just that. 2 words. She didn't even say anything. She just tilted her head slightly toward him, which was all the green light he needed. The kiss was short, jittery. It tasted like rain and summer, and that specific brand of reckless courage you only have when you're 16 and haven't learned how to be terrified of getting your heart broken yet. When they finally pulled back, they sat in this long, heavy silence, just staring out at the water, their shoulders pressed together. "I've liked you for a really long time," he finally admitted. "I know," she shot back. "You did. I was just waiting for you to catch up." He laughed, that signature half-smile, and right then, she knew she was a goner in the absolute best way possible. The next 2 years were the most vibrant of Natalia's entire life. They were packed with love notes scribbled on the backs of receipts, marathon phone calls on freezing winter nights when he was stuck in the city, and ridiculously naive plans about the future, where they'd live, what they'd do, who they'd be when they finally grew up. To this day, she keeps the memory of his love tucked away in this weird space between a mental scrapbook and her gut. It wasn't some cheesy, polished movie romance. It was messy, honest. The kind of love that flares up in the middle of a stupid argument and is still right there waiting when the yelling stops. And then, the bottom dropped out. "It's only for a year," he promised. His bags were packed. The town car was already idling in the driveway. Bryan Vallant had pulled some strings to get him into an elite international boarding school overseas. It was one of those golden ticket opportunities that you just don't say no to. "A year is a lifetime," she whispered. "It's not. It'll fly by, and I'm coming back." Natalia looked at him with this gut-wrenching clarity that terrified her. It was like her soul already knew what her brain was desperately trying to deny. "Do you promise?" He grabbed both of her hands, locking onto her eyes with that intense seriousness she adored. "I promise I'm coming back to you. Bank on it." So she did. Back in the present, Natalia walked into her apartment, flicked on the coffee maker, and just stared blankly at the ocean through her window for 40 straight minutes. Then she cracked open her laptop and pulled up her work email. If she was spiraling, nobody was going to catch her slipping. She'd gotten incredibly good at wearing armor over the last 13 years. The email hit her inbox that same afternoon. It was from the legal firm handling the Vallant estate. Please be advised that Mr. Bryan Vallant will not be moving forward with the sale of the property at this time. He will be remaining in the area for the upcoming months while he evaluates alternative options for the estate. Natalia read the email 3 times. She slammed the laptop shut, opened it back up, read it again. He wasn't leaving. He showed up at her office, and let me tell you, Natalia knew he was there before he even walked through the door. Her assistant buzzed in, trying way too hard to sound professional while totally failing to hide the juicy gossip in her voice. "There's a man here, says his name is Bryan Vallant, asking if you have a few minutes?" Natalia froze for exactly 4 seconds before giving the green light. 4 seconds. Just enough time to slap on her absolute best poker face. He walked in. Up close, it hit different, way more visceral. He had that crisp button-down with the sleeves rolled up just right. You know, that effortlessly expensive look that definitely took 10 minutes in the mirror. And those brown eyes she had spent the last 13 years actively trying to scrub from her brain. They were right there in her office, staring her down with this heavy, complicated mix of emotions that she absolutely refused to unpack. "Thanks for seeing me," he said. "You've got 10 minutes," as she fired back. Her voice landed exactly how she rehearsed it. Ice cold, strictly business. Zero crackle, zero warmth. Absolutely no hint that the 17-year-old version of herself was currently screaming into a pillow inside her chest. He pulled out the chair across from her desk and sat down without even asking. That cocky little move pissed her off way more than it should have. "Natalia, if this is about the estate, you need to speak with my urban planning department. I can forward you their info." "It's not about the estate." "Then what is it?" He just looked at her for a beat, completely unbothered. He had that infuriating patience of a guy who holds all the cards and knows exactly how to play them. "It's about us," he said. "Pay close attention to this dynamic, because right here, this is the Natalia the rest of the world gets to see, polished, untouchable, and armed to the teeth. And this is exactly when you realize that her ironclad armor has a name, a stamped manufacturing date, and was forged by one specific guy. We get so damn good at building walls to protect ourselves, don't we? We build them so high and so thick that eventually we forget how to even open the front door." "There is no us," she clipped. "There was. 13 years ago, it's done." "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry, Bryan." She set her pen down on the desk with a calmness that was straight out of an Oscar-winning performance. "Being angry implies I actually give a damn. I simply moved on." Total garbage. But it was a lie she had rehearsed so many times she practically believed it herself. He didn't take the bait. He just kept studying her with that hyper-observant gaze she used to hate. The look of a guy who isn't just listening to your words, but reading the fine print you're trying to hide. "How are you doing?" he asked. Just like that. No sarcasm, no hidden agenda. The raw simplicity of it completely threw her off balance. "Fine." A heavy pause. "You're down to 8 minutes. I don't need 8 minutes. I just need you to know I didn't come back to blow up your life. I came because I had to see you. I just needed—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. It was the exact same nervous tic from when he was 17, and seeing it on a 30-year-old man hit her right in the chest. "I needed to see if you were doing okay. I already told you I am." "Yeah, you did." He stood up. "All right." He walked to the door, paused, turned back around. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for a damn thing," he said, "but I messed up, Natalia. I messed up bad, and there hasn't been a single day that I haven't thought about it." After the door clicked shut, she just stared at it. The pen was still exactly where she left it. The room was untouched, but internally. The tectonic plates had totally shifted, and she had absolutely no clue how to put the pieces back together. For the next few days, he casually floated around town like he'd never left. And that was the most infuriating thing about Bryan Vallant. The guy didn't tiptoe around asking for permission. He didn't hide out in his massive estate, waiting for her to wave a white flag. He grabbed his morning espresso at her favorite coastal bakery. He casually strolled through the grocery store at her exact usual time. He was even greeting the locals by name, like he'd speed-run the town directory in 48 hours. And whenever they bumped into each other, which was happening way too often to be a coincidence, he never pushed it. He never tried to trap her in a conversation. Just a simple good morning, a quick afternoon, or a casual nod from across the street. He played it cool, like he had all the time in the world, like he knew damn well that time was the only play that would ever actually work on her. And the absolute worst part, it was totally working. By Thursday, she spotted him on the beach. Her beach. Her time. 5:40 a.m. The sky was still rocking that deep, ink blue vibe. He was sitting in the sand, facing the water, cargo pants, a hoodie, completely barefoot. She stopped in her tracks. She could have totally bailed, just pulled a U-turn and walked back to her condo. She kept walking, walked right past him. "You were never an early riser," she tossed out, not stopping, not even turning her head. "You trained me well," he fired back to the ocean. She kept walking, but she couldn't stop the corners of her mouth from pulling up, just for a split second, facing the crashing waves where nobody could catch her slipping. Then she killed the smile and kept moving. Friday rolled around and she finally caved. Well, caved is the wrong word. She made a calculated choice. Big difference. She marched right up to where he was sitting. "Why didn't you pack up and leave last week?" she demanded, skipping the pleasantries and cutting straight to the bone. He turned to look at her. "Because I haven't finished what I came here to do." Selling the family estate? No. She crossed her arms, putting up the barricades. "Why did you never come back, Bryan?" He opened his mouth to speak. She immediately held up a hand, shutting it down. "You know what?" Her voice was eerily steady, cautious, like someone who's been carrying a 100-pound weight for a decade and finally figured out how to balance it. "I don't even need to know." She turned her back on him, but this time she didn't walk away. She just stood there staring out at the ocean, her back to him, like they were painted into the exact same picture, but living in two completely different stories. And maybe that's exactly what was happening. Before we go any further, there's something you need to understand about Natalia. Because it is so incredibly easy to look at a successful, stunning, completely self-made woman and just assume she hatched that way, that she was born with her life perfectly curated and her boundaries set in stone. But let me tell you, I've seen women exactly like this. That kind of bulletproof competence, it doesn't just happen magically. It has a specific origin story. It usually starts with a broken promise. He didn't come back that first year. Natalia waited with that desperate, stubborn patience you really only have when you still genuinely believe in fairy tales. She wrote letters. She blew up his phone. She got absolute radio silence. Then came the brushed-off excuses from Bryan's mum. "Oh, he's just swamped with midterms. The curriculum is brutal. He'll call when he can." Delivered with a tone that dropped a few degrees every single time. By year 2, the letters stopped. By year 3, she deleted his number. She was 20 when she finally flipped the switch. She was sitting on the beach right around golden hour. You know, when the lighting makes everything feel a little too cinematic and heavy. She made a silent, non-negotiable pact with herself. "I'm going to build my own damn life and I'm not waiting around for anybody to give me permission." She skipped the dramatic, tear-soaked villain origin story and went straight to pure, ice-cold clarity. The kind of hyper-focus that settles in right after the worst of the heartbreak finally burns out. She enrolled in a top-tier architecture and design program, hustled through her classes, graduated with honors. By 26, she opened her own studio on the exact same coastline she grew up on. She refused to be chased out. As far as she was concerned, this town belonged to her just as much as it belonged to the trust fund kids in their summer mansions. She built a totally airtight reputation, high-paying, notoriously picky clients, a small elite team, industry magazine features. But along the way, her romantic life took a weird hit. She actually gave the dating scene a real shot. She had 2 solid relationships. One made it 8 months, the other almost 2 years. Genuinely good, drama-free guys who treated her like gold. But there was always this invisible tripwire. Whenever things got deep, whenever they tried to really see her, she'd pull back. Not even on purpose. Her nervous system would just hit the eject button before her brain could even process what was happening. It was like her body had signed a strict non-compete clause that her conscious mind completely forgot about. Fast forward to the present. Bryan actually heard about her firm from the guy running the local bakery. Natalia? Buddy? She practically built this zip code. If you want to move a single brick on that estate, you have to go through her. He walked out onto the sidewalk, coffee in hand, staring at the ocean. He just stood there, letting the weight of the last decade crush him for a second. He thought about everything he threw away. The 17-year-old girl who promised to wait, the 17-year-old idiot who promised to come back, and the absolute wreck of a timeline that happened between that promise and today. Here's the secret. He actually had a reason, an explanation that completely flipped the script on everything. But even in his own head, it sounded exactly like a cheap cop-out. And how the hell do you explain yourself to a woman who made a conscious, permanent decision to stop listening? First thing Monday morning, he marched into her office holding a manila folder. "I need a consult," he said, "for the estate. I want to completely renovate it, not sell it. And word around town is that you're the absolute best in the game for this kind of project." Natalia just stared at him, sizing him up. "Word around town is right," she finally replied. "I am." A heavy beat of silence dropped between them. "All right then," he said. "Draft me a proposal." She grabbed her legal pad. It was just a job, strictly business. That's all it was. Right? The proposal was ready in 3 flat days. She didn't just throw this together. She built it with the exact same ruthless precision she gave every other high-rolling client. We're talking a full structural analysis, phased interventions, strict timelines, and a budget so bulletproof it could survive a courtroom. She put together something absurdly professional, precise, and above all, completely ice-cold. A document that said, "I am better at this than you'll ever be," without a single word out of place. When she pitched it in the conference room, laptop open and slides glowing, Bryan just sat there. He didn't interrupt once, he just listened, giving her that intense, hyper-focused attention she had spent over a decade trying to forget. It was completely intact, like the last 13 years hadn't even happened. "Looks good," he said the second she wrapped up. "Approved. You don't approve it right now," she shot back. "You need to actually read it. Run the contracts past your legal team." "I trust you," Annie said. Just like that. She snapped her laptop shut. "You really shouldn't." "Why not?" "Because I'm a professional, Bryan. Not a friend. Not—" She caught herself. "Just a professional." "All right." He signed exactly where she pointed. "Demo starts whenever you're ready." Let's pause right here. We've all dealt with that one person who completely disarms us by just not playing the game, right? You build up this massive fortress, you bring all your perfectly logical arguments, and they just bypass the walls entirely by saying, "I trust you." It is maddening. The site walkthroughs kicked off the following week. Natalia didn't go solo. She dragged her junior architect, Tiago, and her lead engineer, Carla, along for the ride. She'd locked in that defensive game plan before she even left her driveway. But here's the rub. Bryan showed up to every single walkthrough, and he wasn't hovering or being weird about it. He hung back, listened, and actually asked razor-sharp technical questions that proved he'd done his homework before every meeting. He respected her professional boundaries perfectly, and that's what made it so incredibly difficult. If he had come on too strong, she could have just shut him down. She would have had a concrete reason to kick him off the site. But he didn't. He was just present, engaged, and totally respectful of the lines she drew in the sand, which meant all that suffocating tension. It was entirely in her own head, and that was seriously inconvenient. Week 3 rolls around, and of course Tiago calls out sick. Carla gets pulled into an emergency at another site. Natalia had to fly solo. It was supposed to be a quick in-and-out job, just checking the roof structure for the Phase 2 demolition. 40 minutes tops. Bryan was already there waiting when she pulled up, holding a coffee like he knew her exact schedule, and they both knew he did. "Where's the entourage?" he asked. "Just me today. It's a quick sweep." They did the walkthrough. She took notes, snapped photos, pulled measurements. He shadowed her in total silence, holding the flashlight steady while she checked the second-floor beams, carrying her clipboard when she needed both hands. He just anticipated what she needed without her having to say a single word. Somewhere on the upper floor, she was zeroed in on a ceiling joist when the old wooden floorboards dipped slightly under her boots. It wasn't a total collapse, just a sharp creak and a sudden shift in weight. But before her brain even fully registered the drop, his hand was already gripped tight around her arm. She froze, his hand on her bare arm. They were way too close in that cramped, dusty hallway. The afternoon sun was spilling through the blown-out windows, mixing with the smell of old timber and salt air. "You good?" His voice was low. "I'm fine," she breathed. But she didn't pull away, and neither did he. For 3, maybe 4 seconds, one of those heavy, suspended moments that feels like an absolute eternity, they just stood there. It was that dangerous grey area where the things that could happen suddenly feel way more real than what is actually happening. Then she broke the spell. She took a step back, then another. "Thanks," she said, slipping right back into her clinical voice. "Let's finish the walkthrough. You know that feeling when you narrowly dodge a car crash. Your heart is pounding in your throat, and you just have to pretend you're completely fine and casually change the radio station. That was Natalia in that hallway. He called her later that night. She picked up on the second ring, which was her first rookie mistake. Answering that fast definitely sent a message. "Just wanted to make sure you were actually okay," he said. "I already told you I am. Natalia." A heavy pause. "You don't have to do this." "Do what? Pretend like there isn't something going on here." Dead silence. "Is there something going on?" she asked. Careful, placing every single word like she was walking through a minefield. "I don't know, you tell me." She stared out her apartment window at the ocean, the exact same relentless, constant ocean. "Good night, Bryan," she whispered. She hung up. She sat there gripping her phone for a long, long time. "You have absolutely no idea what I almost just did." That was the line she kept to herself. There comes a point in every story where faking it just doesn't cut it anymore, where every single emotional firewall you've built just completely shorts out, and your body ends up making the call that your brain has been absolutely terrified to make. This chapter. This is that exact moment. It all went down on a Friday, after a grueling meeting that dragged way past 8 o'clock. Natalia was completely alone at the estate with Bryan, grinding through the final blueprints for Phase 1. The rest of the crew had already bailed for the weekend. They were stuck in this massive technical gridlock over a load-bearing wall, and she had to figure it out right then and there. They had the dusty, original construction documents plastered all over this makeshift table in what was eventually going to be the grand living room. He casually wandered off to grab some water and came back sliding a glass right next to her clipboard, without even asking if she was thirsty. "You still despise caffeine after 6 p.m., he noted, setting the glass down. She looked up, completely thrown off guard. "How do you even remember that?" "I remember everything," he replied, just straight up. He stated it as a simple, undeniable fact. 3 words. "I remember everything." Let that sink in for a second, because a phrase like that carries a decade's worth of heavy baggage. The room went dead silent. She forced her eyes back down to the blueprints, desperately trying to focus. But those words were just hanging thick in the air. "I remember everything." We're talking 13 years, and this guy still had her coffee habits hardwired into his brain. The conversation kicked off strictly about the remodel, but it slowly started drifting. They just organically veered off topic without even trying. First, it was just nostalgic throwbacks about the house. "Oh, this window used to face the other way," or "This is exactly where my mom used to hoard her houseplants." Natalia was bantering back before she even realized she had let her guard down. Then the memories got a little more personal. "Do you still bake that ridiculous orange cake?" he asked. "My mom does. I took a swing at it once, and it literally tasted like a Goodyear tire." "Wait, you actually tried?" he asked, genuinely shocked. "I did. Total disaster." She paused, dropping her voice. "Do not tell a soul." He flashed that signature half-smile, and right then she felt that exact flutter in her chest she swore she had permanently killed off. It was just the two of them, huddled over a drafting table, while the night rolled in through the blown-out windows, carrying that heavy saltwater breeze. At some point, the blueprints completely vanished from the conversation. At some point, the physical distance between them just evaporated. He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a stray curl away from her cheek. And let me tell you, that single, feather-light touch felt like striking a match in a room completely soaked in gasoline. She finally stopped pulling away. She tilted her head up, and this time he didn't ask. He just pulled her in. The kiss was an absolute collision. It wasn't hesitant or polite. It was a desperate, breathless rush of 13 years of unsent letters, swallowed pride, and pure, unadulterated longing. His hands tangled deep in her hair, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. She kissed him back with this fierce, reckless hunger she had spent her entire 20s trying to bury. Every slide of his hands down her waist, every heavy breath they shared in the dark, felt like this overwhelming homecoming that she couldn't fight anymore. It was like a dam had finally broken. It was the absolute most inevitable yet terrifying thing on the planet. Inevitable because 13 years of extreme emotional bottling had finally hit max capacity. But terrifying because right when they crossed that line, when the heat of the moment stripped away every last ounce of her carefully constructed armor, Natalia had to face a massive secret she'd been hoarding for over a decade. A truth she had completely buried under convenient excuses like, "The dating pool is trash," or "I'm just married to my career." Sure, those lines sounded fantastic at dinner parties, but they were just a massive smokescreen. Because the human body, it absolutely refuses to lie. Bryan stopped. He paused with this careful, deliberate hesitation, like the gears in his head were suddenly grinding to figure out what he had just realized in the physical shift between them. He looked down at her, his breathing heavy. She instantly snapped her eyes away, pulling her sweater tighter around herself. He stayed dead quiet for what felt like an absolute eternity. "Natalia," he breathed. His tone was totally different now, hushed, completely stunned. "You never—" She didn't say a word. She just stared at the ceiling rafters, at the corner of the room, at literally anything in that house that wasn't his eyes. Absolute, suffocating silence. The only sound was that relentless ocean outside crashing away, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire universe had just been fundamentally altered. He didn't push. He didn't bombard her with questions she obviously wasn't ready to answer. He just sat quietly beside her in the dark, letting the heavy silence do the work. If there's one thing he learned over the last 13 years, it's that playing the waiting game was the only way to actually reach her. Pushing her only made her build the walls higher. Pressure just made her run. The only key to that lock was pure, unadulterated patience. So he waited. She finally started talking, though she completely refused to look at him. Her voice was slow and extremely careful, like she was handling a live grenade. "I tried," she whispered. "Twice. I really tried, but I just couldn't do it. There was always this—" She hesitated. This absolute roadblock, and honestly, it had nothing to do with them. It was entirely a me problem. It was about— She trailed off again. He stayed completely silent, giving her the floor. "It was about this subconscious choice I made a long time ago. This deeply ingrained idea that I was saving myself for the person who was actually right for me." A long, heavy pause. "And the right person was always you." The silence in the room was deafening. "So when you left and ghosted me, I just put on a brave face for the rest of the world and pretended I'd completely moved on. Because faking it was a million times easier than admitting I was pathetic enough to wait around for a guy who decided I wasn't worth the trip back." That last part slipped out way harsher than she intended. It was the raw, unfiltered truth, with absolutely zero sugarcoating. Bryan froze completely, his face contorted with this visceral pain she had literally never seen before. This wasn't some performative, "I'm sorry I got caught" guilt. This was deep, agonizing regret. The kind of gut-punch realization you only get when you finally comprehend the sheer scale of the wreckage you've left behind. "I never decided that," he finally choked out, his voice tight and painfully low. "Bryan, I never ever decided you weren't worth it. I need you to know that right now." "Then what the hell happened?" She finally locked eyes with him. "What on earth happened that stopped you from keeping a promise you made while looking me dead in the eye?" He opened his mouth, closed it, ran a shaky hand through his hair. "There's something else," he started. "Something I never told you. Honestly, I thought I'd never have to, because I was totally convinced you had already moved on and lived a whole life without me. And by the time I figured out the actual truth, that it was just way too late. Natalia just stared at him, her guard creeping back up. What truth? He turned his face toward the dark ocean. I tried to come back, Natalia. His voice actually cracked on the last word. There's a massive piece of this puzzle you don't know about. Flashback 10 years. Bryan was 20, stuck in the city during his sophomore year abroad. He had blown up Natalia's phone dozens of times, but every single call got kicked straight to voicemail. He had poured his heart out in letters that were met with absolutely nothing but static. Using that deeply flawed, agonizing logic of a 20-year-old, he finally threw in the towel. He convinced himself she had simply moved on, found some new guy, built a whole new life that didn't include him. Until the afternoon, he stumbled across a random box tucked away in his dad's home office. Letters. Dozens of them, covered in her handwriting, all addressed to him, sealed shut, never even opened. And buried at the very bottom of that box, a sticky note from his dad's executive assistant. It was an internal memo, explicitly instructing the staff to intercept and withhold all mail from the beach girl. Bryan literally collapsed onto the office floor, just sitting there in a blind haze for God knows how long. When he finally confronted his dad, Renovating Vallant took the hit with the infuriating calm of a guy who had spent years prepping for this exact argument. I did what was best for your trajectory, his dad stated coldly. You have an empire to build. She's a sweet girl, but she does not fit into the world you're entering. She was waiting for me, Bryan argued, his voice shaking. She moved on, his dad dismissed. We all moved on. But that was the day Bryan realized the game was totally rigged. He desperately tried calling her again. The number you have reached is no longer in service. He fired off an email, bounced back. Years later, when he finally had the resources to actually track her down, he discovered she had scrubbed her entire digital footprint. New number, new email, new everything. She completely wiped the slate clean, like a witness entering a protection program. Or maybe she was the one who got erased first. He never actually knew, and that toxic, nagging doubt had been eating him alive from the inside out ever since. Snap back to the present. I tried to come back, he repeated, his voice firming up. And I'm going to bring you the receipts to prove it. Natalia just stared at him. You could physically see a hurricane of emotions ripping across her face, pure disbelief, deeply rooted anger, and this fragile, lingering hope that she had been trying to lock away for years. I hear what you're saying, she finally replied. Her tone was incredibly cautious. Pushed back behind an emotional 10-foot wall, but notice what she didn't say. She never said she actually believed him. He spilled everything. It wasn't some perfectly rehearsed monologue. It was messy. It was brutal. He kept stopping, choking on his own words, struggling to get it all out. But he laid it all on the table. The hidden box of letters in his dad's office, the strict gag order given to the executive assistant, the massive blow-up with Renovating Vallant, the frantic attempts to reach her once the blindfold finally came off, the dead phone line, the bounced emails. It was that gut-wrenching realization that you finally made it to the station. But the last train pulled out hours ago. By the time I found out about the letters, your number was already disconnected, he explained. I tried the only email address I had left, crickets. I even drove out to your mum's house once. The woman who answered the door told me you moved away for school and explicitly said you didn't want any contact. Natalia just froze. My mother told you that. The woman who opened the door did. I just assumed it was her. Dead silence. My mom would never do that, she replied, her voice dangerously slow. I realize that now. He finally looked at her. But back then, I bought it, because, honestly, it's exactly what I felt I deserved after ghosting you for so long. I took it as my final answer, a slammed door. Let's just hit pause for a second, because this is the exact moment where the plot stops being black and white and gets incredibly murky. There isn't some cartoon villain twirling a mustache here. You've got an elite family playing puppet master to protect their legacy. You've got a guy who finally tried to do the right thing but was a day late and $1 short. And you've got a woman who spent years waiting, completely oblivious to the fact that the deck was massively stacked against her from day one. And that kind of parental manipulation is just sickening to me. It's one thing to disapprove of a high school romance, but to actively intercept someone's mail and rewrite their entire reality. That is next-level toxic. "Your dad intercepted my letters," she stated. It wasn't a question. She was just mentally sorting through the sheer weight of this massive betrayal. "Yeah, for how long? I honestly don't know the exact timeline." He rubbed the back of his neck, the tension radiating off him. "The ones I found were from when you were 17, 18, the very first ones you sent." Natalia just stared out at the water. "I sent those letters for 2 straight years," she whispered, "and then I finally gave up." He squeezed his eyes shut. "I know. You didn't know back then." "No, I didn't." The silence stretched out between them. "So why didn't you come back sooner?" she demanded. "You figured all this out years ago. Why show up now?" He took a long, jagged breath before answering. "Because by the time I uncovered the truth, you had already built this incredible life for yourself, and I didn't have the guts to just waltz back in and detonate everything you worked so hard for. I was a coward, a heavy beat, and because my dad passed away last year, keeping the estate boarded up just didn't make sense anymore, and I needed to do this. I needed to finally close a loop that had been left wide open." The estate, not just the estate. Natalia stayed quiet for a long, long time. The ocean just kept doing what it always does, rolling in and pulling out, completely indifferent to the heavy, human wreckage sitting right on its shoreline. "I need to think," she finally breathed. "I know. This doesn't magically fix everything, Bryan. Even if this entire story is true, and I'm still not entirely sure I'm buying it, it doesn't just erase 13 years of damage. I'm not asking for a time machine." "Then what exactly are you asking for?" He turned to face her, locking in with that intense, grounded seriousness she fell in love with at 17. That part of him hadn't faded at all. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that the man standing right in front of you is not the same dumb kid who walked away." She didn't give him an answer, but she didn't walk away either. There is a massive difference between just apologizing and actually earning a second chance. Talk is incredibly cheap. Action is what actually moves the needle. Bryan Vallant completely understood that. He didn't ask her for a damn thing. He didn't push for a timeline. He didn't demand to know how she was processing the trauma. And he certainly didn't show up at her office with some grand, cinematic bouquet of roses trying to win her over. He just showed up, consistently. And he put in the work. It was the subtle, everyday stuff, the tiny details most people would completely gloss over. But for someone like Natalia, who had spent years hyper-fixating on self-preservation, those details were impossible to ignore. He somehow found out from Donna Carmen, Natalia's mom, who had moved back to town and was slowly thawing her icy reception of him, that Natalia had lost her cat a few months back and was really missing having a pet around the condo. 48 hours later, he was standing in her office doorway holding a plastic pet carrier. "I didn't buy him," he blurted out before she could even get a word in. "He's a rescue. He's been stuck at the shelter for 8 months. They named him Brutus, but you can obviously change it." She just stared at the carrier, then back up at him. "You went to the shelter?" "Monday morning." She took the carrier, popped the latch, and this massive, incredibly grumpy orange tabby glared up at her with the pure, unbothered dignity of a cat who knows he's doing you a favor. "He is aggressively ugly," she deadpanned. "Well, you always had a soft spot for the misfits," he fired back. She looked up. "It's the little things, isn't it? Remembering a random, quirky detail like that speaks way louder than some massive, flashy, romantic gesture." He was dead serious. He wasn't trying to flirt or score cheap points. He was just proving that he actually remembered her. She quickly clicked the carrier shut before he could catch the crack in her armor. One completely torrential afternoon, she was stuck late at the estate, trying to troubleshoot a massive structural nightmare that popped up out of nowhere. Bryan showed up out of the blue with takeout. He didn't make a big production out of it. He just dropped the styrofoam containers on a dusty workbench, muttered, "You need to eat," and spent the next hour silently holding blueprints open while she wrestled with the problem. After her crew packed it in for the night, She caught him washing their coffee mugs in what was eventually going to be the kitchen. There wasn't even running water yet. He was literally making it work with a bottled water jug, just quietly handling business. Natalia watched him from the doorway. This is exactly who he is, she thought. It's who he's always been. And honestly, that realization stung way worse than she expected. Later that week, she called her mom. "Did you know he actually tried to track me down?" she asked, cutting straight to the chase. "After he left, he said he came to the house and some woman told him I didn't want anything to do with him." Her mom went dead quiet. "When was this?" "Like a decade ago. A decade ago, I was working a contract in Fortaleza for 6 months. Aunt Margarita was house-sitting." Dead silence. "Aunt Margarita," Natalia repeated. "You know how your aunt is." Her mom sighed. "She always thought you needed to drop that rich kid and move on. If he showed up on her watch, I have zero doubt she'd tell him to get lost." Natalia squeezed her eyes shut. Click, click, click. The entire puzzle was finally locking into place. It was a full moon when he showed up at her beach, on her clock. 5:40 a.m. But she was actually running a little late that morning. It was closer to 6, the sky already bleeding into a pale morning light. He was just standing in the sand, gripping a thick manila envelope. "My dad's estate lawyer found this buried in the archives," he said as she walked up. "It's not all of them, but it's enough." She took the envelope, ripped it open. Letters, dozens of them, covered in her own handwriting, written on that cheap, thin notebook paper she used back then, because it was all she could afford. The postage stamps were officially cancelled, meaning they absolutely went through the mail. But the envelopes, they were completely sealed. Not a single one had ever been opened, stamped with dates from 13 agonizing years ago. Natalia just stared at the stack of envelopes for a long, heavy minute. It was the handwriting of a 17-year-old girl who blindly trusted a promise, pouring her heart out week after week into an absolute void. She never knew it was a void, because the guy on the other end literally had no idea the letters even existed. She didn't say a word for a long time. She just stood there, gripping that stack of letters. Then she carefully tucked them away, not like they were fragile, but like they were incredibly precious. She folded the envelope and slid it into her coat pocket. She looked out at the ocean. "My aunt," she finally broke the silence. "The one who was watching the house when you showed up. She always thought I needed to get over you, that I needed to just forget you." "I know this doesn't magically change anything," he started. "It changes everything," she cut him off. "Straight to the point, no sugarcoating. It obviously doesn't give us the time back, but it completely changes the story I've been telling myself about you for the last 13 years. The air between them felt heavy. "I spent over a decade believing you actively chose not to come back," she continued. "I thought I just wasn't enough for you to keep your word. I carried that dead weight around for a really long time." He turned to face her. The guilt was gone, replaced by this raw, devastating empathy. The kind you only feel when you finally comprehend the exact crushing weight of what the other person had to carry. "I am so incredibly sorry," he breathed. "And I'm not saying that as some cheap excuse. It's literally the only thing I can say when I look at the sheer scale of what happened." They just stood there in the quiet. The ocean kept rolling in, pulling out, rolling in. Absolutely no rush. "You're different than I remembered," she noted. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" She actually thought about it for a second. "More grounded," she decided. "Messier. Just more human." "Yeah, well, hitting 30 tends to do that to you." She almost let a genuine smile slip. 17-year-old Bryan was definitely a lot simpler. He was, but he also didn't know how to fix a damn thing. He turned to her. "The 30-year-old Bryan is actually trying." She kept her eyes locked on the crashing waves for a long beat. "I'm terrified," she admitted, completely stripped down. It was the most brutally honest thing she had said to him since he drove back into town. "I know. No, you don't fully get it." She finally turned to look right at him. "I built this entire life with my bare hands, Bryan. My career, my firm, my peace of mind. None of it came easy. And every single time I tried to let someone else in, my body just hit the brakes. Because I had this massive open tab, a tab I didn't even know was open, because I was living a lie. And now that you know the truth, She stayed quiet for a second. "Now that I know," she said slowly, "I would literally have to be a completely different person to pretend this doesn't change everything." He just waited, leaning on that stubborn patience he knew was his absolute best play. "But I just don't know if I can simply—" She waved her hand, searching for the word. "Just open the door again, just like that." "I'm not asking you to throw the door wide open on day one," he assured her. "I'm just asking for a foot in the door, one chance. Let me prove to you day by day that I'm not going to bolt on you again." She searched his face. "And what if I look at you tomorrow and tell you to leave?" "Then I pack my bags and I leave," he said without missing a beat. "If you ask me to, but it has to be you asking, not the fear." She stared back out at the horizon for what felt like hours. She thought about the 17-year-old version of herself, standing on this exact same beach, watching a town car drive away and desperately clinging to a teenage promise. She thought about the brutal 13 years that followed, the cancelled stamps, the letters that never made it. And then she thought about the man standing right next to her, the guy who didn't show up with empty apologies, but with hard receipts, with maddening patience, with an ugly orange rescue cat and cold takeout on a rainy Tuesday, and the one argument she could never actually defeat, the fact that he truly saw her. He always had. And she thought about the fear. It was incredibly real. It was justified, forged in 13 years of thick protective armor. But right here, right now, with all the missing pieces finally laid out on the table, the fear suddenly felt a lot smaller than what was standing right in front of her. "Then stay," she finally said. "Let that hang in the air for a second. 2 little words. But they are carrying 13 years of heavy emotional baggage. My wife and I always say that the hardest part about forgiveness isn't the apology. It's the terrifying leap of faith you have to take right after you've spent years putting up deadbolts." And Natalia just took the leap. Her voice was dead calm, completely resolute. It carried the heavy weight of a woman who knew exactly what she was signing up for. He quickly turned his head to look at her. "Stay," she repeated. "But this time, you don't get to just walk away. Not like that. Not without warning me, and not without looking me in the eye when you do it." "I'm not going anywhere," he swore. "That is not a promise," she corrected him, her voice firm. "I've heard your promises. This is a commitment. There's a massive difference." He held her gaze. "It is a massive difference," he agreed, "and I'm fully committed." He didn't pull her into some dramatic Hollywood-style embrace. He didn't have to. He just stood right beside her, staring out at the exact same ocean, their shoulders just barely brushing against each other. Just like 2 barefoot teenagers on a wraparound porch during a summer storm. The ocean rolled in, it pulled out, and it always came back. Fast forward a few months. The sun was still dragging its feet when they walked down to the water. 5:40 a.m. The sky was stuck in that weird, indecisive twilight color Natalia had basically memorized by now. The coastal wind was already whipping around before the light even hit the sand. She stepped right up to the water's edge, letting the freezing surf wash over her ankles. A few stray curls blew across her face, but this time, she didn't have to just ignore them. A hand gently brushed them away. Bryan was standing right there beside her, barefoot in the damp sand, gripping his morning coffee. She had completely given up on trying to make him sleep in past 6. They just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, staring out at the exact same horizon. "The ocean always comes back," she murmured. He turned to look at her. "I think I said that once," he replied. "When you were 17, she shot back, finally meeting his eyes. "You were actually right." He didn't say a word. He just kept studying her with that intense, grounded look, the look of a guy who isn't just staring at you, but genuinely seeing you. And this time, she completely let him. Let me ask you guys something, and I want you to be brutally honest down in the comments. Do you actually buy into second chances like this? Could you pick up a story that was put on ice for 13 solid years, just waiting for the right moment? My wife and I were actually talking about this the other day while putting this script together. Some stories don't actually end. They just take a massive, agonizingly long commercial break. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a completely open tab with someone from your past that just never fully closed? Let's talk about it. When they finally walked back into Natalia's condo, Brutus was waiting for them. The aggressively ugly orange shelter cat, kept his original name simply because it matched his absolute menace of a personality. He was perched on the windowsill, glaring at them with that pure, unearned superiority that only cats possess. "He's totally judging us," Bryan muttered. "He judges literally everyone," she replied. "It's a full-time job." They walked inside, and outside the ocean just kept doing its thing, steady, drama-free, exactly like it always does.